In the latest explosive twist on the bold and the beautiful Los Angeles is once again turned upside down by a paternity bombshell that no one, not even the most seasoned members of the Forrester, Logan, or Spencer dynasties, saw coming. For months, subtle clues were scattered like breadcrumbs. Dylan's guarded questions about his past, the mysterious tension whenever certain names were mentioned, the uneasy glances exchanged in boardrooms at Forrester Creations, and the way older characters would abruptly change the subject whenever his childhood was discussed. It all felt like classic soap foreboding, but no one could have predicted just how seismic the truth would be. When the DNA results were finally revealed, the fallout was immediate and devastating. The man who had been living his life believing one story about his origins suddenly found his entire identity rewritten in a single breathless moment. Dylan's biological father was not a forgotten fling or a long-lost stranger from another state. He was someone deeply woven into the fabric of the show's most powerful family, a man whose name alone carries decades of legacy, scandal, and influence in Los Angeles. The revelation unfolded in true bold and the beautiful fashion. In a crowded room, thick with tension, where whispered suspicions finally erupted into undeniable truth. What began as a private conversation quickly spiraled into a public reckoning. As the sealed envelope was opened and the results read aloud, the silence was suffocating. Faces drained of color. Hands trembled. Relationships that had survived affairs, betrayals, and corporate takeovers suddenly felt fragile. The shock wasn't just about biology. It was about betrayal, about secrets carefully buried for years, about a past decision that now threatened to unravel multiple families at once. Dylan stood frozen, the weight of the moment crashing over him. For years he had wrestled with the sense that something about his story didn't add up. Now he knew why. The father reveal that nobody saw coming didn't just alter Dylan's future. It rewrote the past. Memories were re-examined through a new lens. Moments that once seemed ordinary now carried hidden meaning. Why had this man always taken such a keen interest in Dylan's life? Why had he offered guidance at crucial turning points? Why had there always been an undercurrent of tension whenever they argued, as though something unspoken hovered between them? The answers were now painfully clear. What had been dismissed as coincidence was actually connection. What had been mistaken for mentorship was paternal instinct. And what had been perceived as rivalry may have been the subconscious friction of a father and son unknowingly competing for power and respect. For Dylan, the emotional whiplash was overwhelming. Anger came first, sharp, hot, and immediate. How could his mother have kept this from him? How many years had he spent searching for pieces of himself that were right in front of him all along? But beneath the anger was something even more destabilizing: vulnerability. Identity is the foundation upon which every choice is built. To discover that foundation was constructed on a lie shakes a person to their core. Dylan wasn't just learning a name. He was confronting the collapse of everything he thought he knew about who he was and where he came from. The betrayal cut deeper because it involved love. His mother hadn't hidden the truth out of cruelty. She had done it out of fear, desperation, and perhaps even protection. But intention didn't lessen the impact. Meanwhile, the newly revealed father was left grappling with a storm of his own. For years he had lived with a secret, one born from a single night, a complicated romance, or perhaps a calculated decision made during a vulnerable chapter of his life. He had convinced himself that keeping silent was the right choice. Maybe he believed he was protecting his marriage. Maybe he feared destroying a powerful family name. Or maybe he simply wasn't ready to confront the possibility that he had a son growing up without him. Whatever the reason, the truth now stood exposed, impossible to contain. The look in Dylan's eyes, a mixture of hurt, disbelief, and reluctant recognition, was something he would never forget. The ripple effects spread instantly through the extended family. Spouses questioned loyalty. Siblings questioned inheritance. Old rivalries reignited with new ammunition. In the high-stakes world of fashion empires and boardroom battles, bloodlines matter. Legacies matter. And suddenly, Dylan wasn't just an outsider carving his own path. He was a rightful heir to something far bigger than anyone had imagined. That shift alone threatened existing power dynamics. People who once dismissed him now had to reconsider their positions. Those who had underestimated him realized they might have been overlooking a direct descendant of one of the most influential figures in the city. But the most heartbreaking aspect of the reveal wasn't corporate. It was personal. Dylan had spent years forming opinions about the man he thought was his father. He had wrestled with resentment, longing, and unanswered questions. Now, he was forced to separate the myth from the man standing before him. The stranger he thought he knew was suddenly family. That kind of emotional recalibration doesn't happen overnight. Trust cannot be built in the shadow of a secret. It must be earned slowly and painfully. And in true soap fashion, just as the truth began to surface, more complications emerged. Was this the full story? Or were there still details hidden beneath layers of old lies? Friends found themselves caught in the crossfire. Some urged forgiveness, arguing that the past cannot be rewritten, but the future can be shaped. Others insisted that a betrayal of this magnitude deserved accountability. The debate wasn't just about Dylan, it was about whether family is defined by blood or by years of shared experience. The man who raised him, who attended school events and offered life advice, may not share his DNA, but does that erase the bond they built? The emotional complexity added layers of realism to the storyline, reminding viewers why the show continues to captivate audiences decade after decade. As Dylan's life turned upside down, so did his relationships. Romantic tensions intensified as partners questioned what this meant for their future. Would Dylan embrace his newfound legacy and step into a powerful dynasty? Or would he reject it, determined to forge his own identity separate from the scandal? The uncertainty fueled speculation across Los Angeles. Every conversation carried an undercurrent of anticipation. Every glance felt loaded with meaning. The reveal didn't just answer a question. It opened 100 new ones. In classic bold and the beautiful fashion, the writers ensured that the emotional stakes remained front and center. This wasn't just about shock value. It was about examining how secrets shape lives, how fear can lead to choices that echo for decades, and how truth, once unleashed, cannot be contained. Dylan's journey from confusion to clarity, and now to confrontation, reflects a universal human experience. We all seek to understand where we come from. We all want to believe that our stories make sense. When those stories shift, it forces growth, however painful. The father himself faces a crossroads. Does he step up fully, claiming his son publicly and risking the wrath of those he once tried to protect? Or does he retreat, overwhelmed by the consequences? Redemption is possible, but it requires humility and courage. In a world where pride often drives conflict, that may be the greatest challenge of all. Meanwhile, Dylan must decide whether to allow anger to define him, or to channel it into strength. The power dynamic between them promises to be one of the most compelling arcs in recent memory, layered with resentment, curiosity, and perhaps even reluctant admiration. The shockwaves continue to reverberate, touching every corner of the canvas. Boardroom alliances shift. Family dinners grow tense. Long-standing friendships strain under the weight of divided loyalties. And through it all, Dylan stands at the center. No longer the young man searching for answers, but the catalyst for a transformation that will reshape the family's future. The truth may have been buried for years, but once revealed, it demands to be reckoned with. What makes this reveal unforgettable isn't just the surprise factor. It's the emotional authenticity. Viewers watched a character confront the collapse of his personal narrative and begin the painful work of rebuilding it. They saw parents forced to confront past decisions. They witnessed a family grapple with the meaning of loyalty and legacy. And as always, the drama felt larger than life, yet grounded in relatable human emotion. The father reveal that nobody saw coming has officially altered the trajectory of Dylan's life. Whether it leads to reconciliation or further destruction remains to be seen. But one thing is certain, nothing will ever be the same. The foundation has cracked. The truth has surfaced. And in the glittering yet treacherous world of the bold and the beautiful, that kind of revelation doesn't fade quietly. It explodes, leaving everyone forever changed. The aftermath of the revelation on the bold and the beautiful did not settle into quiet acceptance the way some had hoped. Instead, it ignited a slow-burning fire that spread through every relationship Dylan held dear. In the days following the DNA confirmation, the mansion hallways, the design offices, and even the intimate corners of favorite Los Angeles restaurants felt charged with electricity. Conversations stopped when Dylan entered a room. Whispers followed him down corridors. The man who once felt like he was on the outside looking in now found himself at the center of everyone's attention, and not in a way he wanted. Dylan tried to maintain composure. He told himself that strength meant staying calm, that dignity meant refusing to let the shock define him. But alone the cracks showed. He replayed every interaction he'd ever had with his newly revealed father. The advice that once felt patronizing now felt loaded with hidden guilt. The disapproval during arguments seemed less about business and more about projection. There were moments, small, almost imperceptible, when their eyes had met and something unspoken passed between them. At the time, Dylan dismissed it as tension. Now he recognized it as something deeper: recognition. His mother, meanwhile, faced a reckoning of her own. For years she had convinced herself that keeping the secret was an act of protection. She had told herself that shielding Dylan from the complicated truth would give him stability. But stability built on silence is fragile. When Dylan confronted her, the pain in his voice cut deeper than any accusation. He didn't yell at first. He simply asked why. Why she had denied him the chance to know his father. Why she had allowed him to question his identity for so long. Why she had trusted fear more than honesty. Her tears flowed freely, but tears could not undo decades of concealment. The man revealed as Dylan's biological father struggled with public scrutiny. He had built a reputation on integrity and leadership. His image was polished, controlled, and carefully maintained. Now, headlines and gossip columns speculated about his past. Old acquaintances resurfaced with half-remembered stories. Rivals smirked at the sudden vulnerability in his armor. Yet none of that compared to the personal shame he felt when facing Dylan. Regret is a heavy burden, especially when it arrives too late to rewrite history. What complicated matters further was the presence of the man who had raised Dylan. Though not connected by blood, he had poured years of love and guidance into the boy's life. He felt blindsided, not just by the biological truth, but by the implication that his role might be diminished. Dylan made it clear that fatherhood is more than DNA, but emotions do not always align with logic. In private, the man wrestled with insecurity. Had he unknowingly been living someone else's story? Had he sensed the truth all along but chosen denial? The family's matriarchs and patriarchs convened behind closed doors, discussing the implications. In a world where legacy equates to power, a newly discovered heir changes everything. Dylan's place within the family tree wasn't symbolic. It was strategic. Shares, leadership positions, and long-term succession plans suddenly required reevaluation. Some relatives welcomed him warmly, eager to strengthen the family bond. Others viewed him as a threat, a wild card capable of disrupting carefully crafted hierarchies. At a tense family dinner meant to symbolize unity, the fault lines became visible. Glasses clinked, polite smiles were exchanged, and rehearsed statements about forgiveness filled the air. But beneath the surface, resentment simmered. One relative questioned whether Dylan would now expect a larger role in the company. Another subtly hinted that trust must be rebuilt before privileges are granted. Dylan listened, absorbing every word. He realized that while the truth gave him a biological connection, it did not guarantee acceptance. His romantic relationship also faced strain. His partner, once confident in their shared plans, now felt uncertain. Would Dylan's priorities shift? Would he become consumed by his new legacy? The reveal forced conversations about identity and ambition. Dylan admitted that part of him felt drawn to explore what his father's world could offer. Not for status but for understanding. He wanted to see where he came from, to examine the pieces of himself that might mirror this man. But he feared that curiosity would be misinterpreted as opportunism. In the weeks that followed, private meetings between father and son began. They were awkward at first, stiff exchanges filled with cautious words. The father attempted to explain the past, recounting the circumstances that led to secrecy. He spoke of timing, of complicated relationships, of fear of losing everything. Dylan listened but did not immediately forgive. Forgiveness requires accountability. Meanwhile, rivals within the corporate sphere seized the opportunity to exploit the chaos. Rumors circulated that the family was fractured beyond repair. Competitors attempted to lure Dylan into alliances, hoping to capitalize on his vulnerable state. He refused, determined not to become a pawn. Yet the pressure mounted. Every decision he made seemed to carry symbolic weight. If he defended his biological father publicly, some would accuse him of choosing power over principle. If he distanced himself, Others would call him ungrateful. The emotional crescendo arrived when Dylan addressed the family openly. Standing before them, he spoke not as a claimant to a legacy but as a son seeking clarity. He acknowledged the hurt, the confusion, and the anger. He recognized the man who raised him as his father in every way that mattered. And he expressed a cautious willingness to explore a relationship with his biological parent, not because of inheritance, but because truth deserves a chance. The room fell silent as his words resonated. That speech marked a turning point. It reframed the narrative from scandal to growth. It reminded everyone that while secrets can divide, honesty can begin to heal. Yet healing is not linear. There were setbacks. Heated arguments erupted when old wounds reopened. The father occasionally slipped into defensiveness. Dylan sometimes retreated into silence. But progress, however incremental, continued. One particularly poignant moment occurred when the father shared a box of old photographs he had kept hidden for years. Snapshots from a time when he had quietly watched Dylan from afar. School events attended discreetly. Milestones observed without acknowledgement. The admission that he had been present, albeit in the shadows, complicated Dylan's anger. It suggested that absence was not indifference but cowardice. That nuance mattered. As the months unfolded, Dylan began carving out a new identity that integrated both sides of his story. He refused to let the revelation define him solely as an heir or a victim. Instead, he used it as motivation to strengthen his independence. He pursued initiatives within the company on his own merit, proving that talent is not inherited but cultivated. Gradually, even skeptics acknowledged his competence. Family gatherings grew less tense. Laughter returned in cautious doses. The man who raised Dylan found reassurance in their enduring bond. The biological father demonstrated commitment through consistent effort rather than grand gestures. Trust, fragile as glass, began to solidify. Yet the show's signature unpredictability ensures that no resolution remains untouched by future twists. There are whispers of additional secrets tied to the night Dylan was conceived, unanswered questions about who knew the truth and who actively participated in keeping it hidden. Those possibilities linger like storm clouds on the horizon. For now, however, Dylan stands transformed. The shock that once threatened to destabilize him has become a catalyst for self-discovery. He has confronted betrayal without losing compassion. He has navigated ambition without sacrificing integrity. And he has learned that identity is not dictated solely by bloodlines but by choices made in the present. The father reveal that nobody saw coming did more than shock a family. It forced each character to examine their values. It challenged the notion that power can shield people from consequences. It illustrated that even in a world defined by glamour and rivalry, vulnerability remains the most powerful force of all. In true Bold and the Beautiful fashion, the storyline blends high-stakes drama with intimate human emotion. Viewers witness not just the spectacle of a massive reveal, but the painstaking process of rebuilding trust. They see a son grappling with dual father figures, each flawed yet meaningful. They see a man confronting his past with humility. And they see a family learning that legacy is not preserved through silence, but strengthened through truth. Dylan's life has undeniably turned upside down. But from the wreckage of secrecy emerges the possibility of something stronger. A redefined family bound not just by name, but by choice. The shockwaves may continue, new twists may arise, and loyalties may be tested again. Yet one truth remains unshaken. The revelation changed everything, and nothing will ever return to the simplicity of before. As the dust continued to settle on the Bold and the Beautiful, the emotional consequences of Dylan's paternity revealed deepened in ways no one initially anticipated. What had begun as a shocking announcement evolved into a long-term transformation of identity, loyalty, and power within the family. The initial gasps and confrontations were only the beginning. The real drama unfolded in the quiet, reflective moments that followed. Dylan found himself increasingly introspective. Late at night, long after the mansion lights dimmed and the city outside grew still, he would sit alone replaying conversations from his childhood. Advice that once felt random now carried intention. Moments of unexplained tension between his mother and his biological father suddenly made painful sense. He realized that he had been living inside a story where half the script was missing. Now that the missing pages had been revealed, he was tasked with rewriting the ending. His relationship with the man who raised him became a cornerstone of stability. They shared an honest, raw conversation that neither would ever forget. Dylan made it clear that biology could not erase years of love, discipline, and presence. The man admitted his own insecurities, the quiet fear that he might be replaced or seen as less than. But Dylan reassured him. Fatherhood is measured in sacrifices made and memories shared, not chromosomes. That reassurance strengthened their bond rather than weakened it. In a strange way, the revelation forced them to express emotions they had always assumed were understood. Meanwhile, his biological father made a deliberate choice to step back from public declarations and instead focus on private accountability. He began by apologizing, not once but repeatedly and without defensiveness. He acknowledged that fear had guided his decision years ago, and that fear had cost both of them time they could never recover. Dylan did not immediately respond with forgiveness, but he listened. And listening in that moment was significant progress. As the coming day unfolded with deceptive calm across Los Angeles, the characters moved through their routines with the fragile perfection of people pretending their worlds were formally cracking, because although Taylor had induced herself that ending effects with Cleric was the only responsible choice, the silence that followed felt heavier than any battle she'd ever survived, and when she sat alone in her office reviewing patient lines she slightly read, her mind kept drifting back to the look on